Now, what we'll be doing the next 2 months is an adult level study of Matthew, trying to get what this book is about in our heads. And it'll be pretty sketchy to study the whole thing in 2 months. But what I would hope you would do is, for each lesson, and I'm not sure that my presentation will exactly correspond to Earl's scheduling of this. It's got to be pretty close because there are 26 lessons and 28 chapters. It's got to be pretty close, however you schedule it. But read the material in the lesson that you're going to be teaching, and be thinking about how you're going to adapt this. Be talking to each other and consulting with other people as we get various people in this. Maryland with their work with the resource center and various things. There'll be a lot of people to consult about, and experienced people to consult with regard to teaching it at different age levels. So make use of the materials that she's going to put in the resource center, and also make use of the people that we have available. But we don't want people to always be studying the Bible at a child's level to teach children. The primary purpose of our coming together is for the edification of the saints. There's just an abundance of evidence in the New Testament to indicate that. And so we want, above all else, to build up the Christians with this. And incidentally, in our class system then, to do what we can with children. But we're hoping to encourage people to do a whole lot with their children at home. And we'll have a schedule of Bible readings, and hopefully be able to get people deeply involved in reading the Bible with their children at home in this series. In the Gospel according to Matthew, we have Matthew's witness to the Christ. Now, this is what we want to do then, to come to Matthew and to understand this apostle's witness to the Christ. It's not going to be a synoptic study where we combine all the Gospels. The Bible never does that. And if that's the only way we ever study it, we miss what the Bible does present. And the thing that I want to keep encouraging is that we just trust the book. And there'll be some illustrations where I'll point out what I mean by that, mainly one of them in the early part of Matthew. How to do it, how not to do it. But we want to come to the Gospel of Matthew and to find out what Matthew thought of Jesus Christ and what he wanted us to think about Jesus Christ in other words, to appreciate his witness to the Christ. His purpose is a demonstration of the Messiahship of Jesus. This is a Jewish gospel, more so than any of the others. There are lots of quotations from the Old Testament. It is evidently written to a Jewish audience, and it is intended to demonstrate that this Jesus who has come, who's born in Bethlehem, is the fulfillment of the Old Testament hopes, that he is the Messiah, that anointed king that was to come, that was spoken of in the Old Testament prophets. There are two special qualifications that Matthew had that I think are worth pointing out. He was one of Jesus' chosen apostles, and that means that he was one of those who went about with Jesus and was a witness to most of the things that we'll be reading in the Gospel according to Matthew. Now, not all, but he was a witness of a good bit of it. And it is his personal eyewitness testimony that we will often have in this gospel. But the other thing that I didn't appreciate till I read Edgar J. Goodspeed's book on Matthew, an apostle and evangelist, is that Jesus, in choosing a publican to be an apostle, chose a man who was already an expert at keeping records. He was a tax collector and a tax gatherer. And that would mean that he had a habit, and a habit of mind with regard to record keeping, precise record keeping. And Jesus, it may be, chose this man not so much for his preaching as for his ability to keep the records and to write this book. And we have in this book his witness to the Christ, and that's where we want to put the emphasis. Now, I think I counted about 7 different sections that we need to look at this morning, so that allows about 5 minutes for each. We'll have to scoot pretty rapidly. I'm going to depend on you to read and read and read in advance, to just have Earl's material already in your minds when you come to class, and then we'll be able just to move pretty rapidly through our material here. We begin with genealogy. Is this important? If this is going to be his witness to the Messiah?
Yes, to the Jews especially.
Yeah. He could not be the Messiah without what? Yeah, without the birth line, without this royal descent. And that is the thing that is pointed out. Now, here's a good place to illustrate what I'm talking about when I say let the book do the work. I went to a class in Michigan when I was visiting Debbie, I guess last winter. And the man that was teaching there was beginning the study of Matthew. And he spent, I don't know how many weeks on this genealogy. And what he was doing was going through these figures, going back to the Old Testament, learning the stories about each of these, and then presenting practical lessons on each of them. I don't know what he would do if he were teaching Kings and Chronicles, but he was not teaching Matthew, he was teaching Kings and Chronicles. And, you know, it's not that there were not some good lessons. There were some good practical lessons in this. But when are we ever going to study Matthew and just let Matthew say what Matthew says? This is a good illustration of the point. Trust the book. The book is sufficient. It is valuable and it is sufficient, according to 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. So this is the thing we want to do. And there's just one point here, and that is that Jesus was descended from David, and he was also descended from Abraham. The first verse mentions the 2 figures that are most important here. It gives the title or the heading probably of just this section. Some people think it's the whole of the book of Matthew, but it may be just this section. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So if you've studied the Old Testament, you've got some familiarity with the Old Testament, and then you come to this in the very first verse of the New Testament, it is pointed out that this is the age of fulfillment, and that the fulfillment of these Old Testament promises is found in a person called Jesus, who is the Christ. Now, Abraham is important because of these promises that God gave him. I've given just a couple of illustrations, the 2 primary references to this, Genesis 12, 1-3, and Genesis 22, verse 18. God calls Abraham and brings him to the land of Canaan, and he says, I'm going to make a great nation of you, and later he'll tell him, I'll give you this land, and in thee all the families of the earth will be blessed. Well, after the offering of Isaac in chapter 22, then this promise is repeated, but in this way, in thy seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. When it calls Jesus the son of Abraham and shows his descent from Abraham, it is connecting him with these promises that God had made to Abraham. The heir of the promises, the one in whom it will be fulfilled. And then there were the prophecies concerning David. And these are things, you know, as depending on what age the children are that you'll be teaching, the older they are, the more of this you'll want to impress on their minds. But David was given the covenant by God and the promise in 2 Samuel chapter 7 verses 11 to 16 that he would establish the throne of his kingdom. He would not take the kingdom away from him as he had taken it away from Saul, but he would establish the throne of his kingdom. It'd be handed down from father to son and so forth. If they're disobedient, I'll chastise them, but I'll not take the kingdom away from you. Well, the prophets and the psalmist, Psalm 89, Isaiah 9:6, Jeremiah, Amos, but these are just a sampling. There are lots of these in the Old Testament, where the prophets and the people would begin to wonder when they go through a period like the Babylonian captivity, and what has become of these promises that God made to David. The king has been removed from the throne. The people have been scattered. And what has become of these? Well, you've got all of these prophecies that look to the future, to the Messianic king. Sometimes he'll be called David, sometimes David's son. It'll be a second David, this Messianic king, descended from David, who will be this ideal king that will rule with righteousness, unlike some of David's descendants, with righteousness over the people. Jesus, at the very first verse, is indicated as the fulfiller of the promises made to David, made to Abraham. And the genealogy then just shows his descent and establishes his descent. I don't know how some of this is to be understood. When you get to the end of it, at verse 17, it says, so all the generations from Abraham unto David are 14 generations, from David unto the carrying away to Babylon, 14 generations, from the carrying away to Babylon unto the Christ, 14 generations. That means 14 generations in his listing of things. He leaves some of them out. When you compare this with Chronicles and other places where you have the genealogies, you see that some of them are left out, and evidently especially to make it equally 14. He evidently had some point in that. If you can find out with your research, I wish you would tell me what the point is. They found out that the name David, if you translate that into numerical values, like they did in ancient days sometimes, that equals 14. So some people think it may be an allusion to David, that the whole thing just stresses David here. There are other ideas, and I don't have the foggiest notion, and I've read several of the things, but I'm not convinced by anything I've read, so I don't know. These are not things that are going to be important. The important thing is to stress the significance of the Messiah being descended from David and from Abraham. Before I move from this, I want to give an overall analysis. I want us to kind of have a key thumbnail sketch of Matthew. And this first section, I think, is background. The prelude to the public ministry is what I've called it here, from Matthew 1:1 going through the temptation, which ends in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 11. And then we begin with the Galilean ministry. So we try to do an analysis that will help us to get a grasp of the major sections. Any thought now on this? Now, here's what we expect next. The manner of Jesus' birth is described. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise. Now, this tells the story from Joseph's point of view. Luke, in the first chapter, has the angel coming to Mary, making the announcement in advance. And she submits to what is said there. She has to submit. She has to be an obedient woman in this, because the Lord would not rape her. And it's important that she submit, because this is really a challenging thing for her. It's a real test of faith, and we see how that is when we read this from Joseph's standpoint. The angel comes and announces this to Mary and explains it all to Mary, but she evidently does not go to Joseph and explain what's happening. I mean, after all, come and say, an angel? Yeah. She leaves it to the Lord to handle this. She trusts him and just yields to him altogether. Well, This thing that was the greatest honor that any woman in all of history could possibly have, at the first appears to be a shame, a disgrace. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. Betrothed. And that means, in terms of the Jewish customs, that a commitment had been made. The contract had been made between the two, but they had not come together to live together yet for a period of time. And you find this in some of the parables of Jesus, where a commitment has been made, a betrothal, and yet the bride will continue to live at her parents' house for a period of time until the coming together. And then there's that wedding feast that the parables speak of, Matthew 25, for example, and all of that. But this is a commitment that is more than our engagement period is. This woman is considered his wife. If he does not go on and marry her, he is going to have to give her divorce papers to put her away. And so it's more of a commitment and more like marriage itself. I think the truth is that when the actual coming together took place and the wedding feast, that there was no wedding ceremony then. This had already taken place back here in this initial betrothal, as this is called. And so here she is, and she's found with child. Well, what is a man to think? In verse 19, you have Joseph's plan. Joseph, her husband, being a righteous man, not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privily. So it seems to me there are two characteristics of Joseph that come into play here. One, he's a righteous man. That means he is a man who is who very careful about obeying the law. But on the other hand, I mean, look at the position he's going to put Mary in, to come down with the full force of the law on her. So on the other hand, he was compassionate toward her and was not willing to make her a public example, to subject her to more of a disgrace publicly than had to be. And so he was minded to put her away privily. Now I think that means to give her the writ of divorcement that Matthew 24 and the first 4 verses speak of, but as privately as possible. Probably it'd have to be witnessed by 2 or 3 witnesses, but not bringing her before the courts and all that public spectacle of it. This was his plan. But she had trusted the Lord to make all this clear to him and to everyone concerned, and that's exactly what happens. In verses 20 to 23, an angel appears to Joseph. But when he thought on these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary thy wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. Now, he didn't want a wife that had been unfaithful to him. He has to have this encouragement. You need not be afraid. This is God at work in this, and this is of the Holy Spirit. Luke gives a fuller explanation of the virgin conception. The Holy Spirit will overshadow you, and the power of the Most High will come upon you. This is the language that he uses. You may want to read the parallel in Luke just for that. But don't bring in the other Gospels every time you can, unless it's just necessary to understand something, because you want to get Matthew's witness to the Christ as we study this and see what he wants us to understand. Let him make his point about the Christ. All right. Verse 21 and 22 then, the name that is to be assigned, which shows his mission. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for it is he that shall save his people from their sins. Jesus is the New Testament equivalent of what Old Testament name? In fact, you've even got this man referred to a couple of times in the New Testament and called Jesus. Joshua. It's the same name, the Hebrew and the Greek form, and it means salvation, or Jehovah is salvation, something of that nature. And so by taking Mary as his wife and by owning this son as his and giving him a name, then this gives to Jesus legal status as the adopted son of this descendant of David. It's Joseph's genealogy that we have here. Some think that it's Mary's in Luke, but I'm not so sure that that's the case. It seems to be presented as Joseph's there too, although there's some difficulties when you compare the two that you can't get into in a children's class like you'll be teaching. Joseph is called the son of David. That's the important thing about this man here. And by giving him this name, then this indicates the mission of the Christ, the Messiah. And it right away, right on page 1 of Matthew, shows a different view of the Messiah that was often held in the nation. They were thinking of a great warrior Messiah and an earthly king who would free them from the yoke of the Romans and establish an independent nation and reign here on earth. But already we have spiritual nature of the mission of the Messiah. He shall save his people from their sins. Now there's another name given to him. Although he'll not be called by this name, it also shows something of the significance of this person. Now all this has come to pass, verse 22, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is being interpreted God with us. God with us. Now, I think if we were studying Isaiah, we would have to go more into this than we do here. There really seems to be a more immediate application of this prophecy in the circumstances of the times of Isaiah, and then a secondary application to the Messiah that is to come. And it seems to me that he will have the name Emmanuel in a different sense and a fuller sense than anyone ever could. And he is conceived by his mother without a human father. It's by the Holy Spirit. It is a virgin that conceives. And so certainly it's going to be God with us. If God is his father and Mary his mother, then he will be at one and the same time. Son of man, Son of God. And in that most important sense of all, you have God actually living among men, God with us. And so we've got his mission defined, and we've got his divine nature defined in these names that are given. And we notice the stress that's going to be given in every one of these passages in the early part of this to the connection with the Old Testament, showing the flow of Old Testament history that finds its culmination in the Christ, the fulfillment of the promises and the Old Testament hopes in Jesus Christ. The obedience of Joseph is given a lot of stress in these passages, at least 3 times when he is told what to do, and we're told he did it. And Joseph arose from his sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and took unto him his wife, and knew her not, in the sexual sense of the knowledge. They had not come together, and when they came together, he did not know her in this sense till she had brought forth a son, and he called his name Jesus. Well, one of the Jewish slanders was that Jesus was just an illegitimate son of, I think they said, some Roman soldier or something of that nature. And so Matthew just strikes at the root of that right here at the beginning and connects it with this Old Testament prophecy to show how the birth of Jesus came about. A quick shot.
It's interesting that he builds a scriptural basis for his, as his starting point. He takes them to basically to the Bible that they have, like a very solid foundation for it goes with.
Yeah. Jesus is not going to be some bolt out of the blue, some innovator, some sort of isolated figure. He has these connections the Old Testament. Genealogy points this out, and the prophecies and the hopes of the Old Testament point this out. Now, remarkable thing, visit of the Magi, the wise men, as this is sometimes translated. A lot of things here. If you want to do some reading on these things, there are lots of commentaries. If you want to write some of these down, I recommend especially, let's see, this is one that couldn't get to work. Ritterbo's, Broadus, France, and Leon Morris. You won't have time to read all of these, but if you read one or two of these, you will have most of the reference material that you need to explain various difficulties of the text and so forth. I don't know how much you'll need to go into that, but if you want to use some of these, it'll do a lot for you. So, the Magi appear in Jerusalem. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men, and the Greek is Magi, from the east, came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, and are come to worship him. Now, we have to be brief about all these points, but the time is indicated generally, and we see pretty soon that this is going to be the very end of the reign of this King Herod, and then he'll be replaced by Herod Archelaus. But this is Herod the Great. He was not a Jew. He was the son of Antipater of Idumea. Now, this is the territory to the south, around Edom, the south of Judea. And the Romans had appointed this man as king in, I think, 40 A.D. In his days, most remarkable thing happens, and I keep saying remarkable because Matthew does. He uses the word behold. It's like look, like a remarkable thing. These Magi from the east make an appearance in Jerusalem. Now, this word that describes these men is a word that first referred to a tribe of the Medes. And then after that it referred to scientists, and especially, what kind of scientists would you imagine? Astronomers, astrologers, you may say. These were people who studied the stars. Now, when they come, they explain why they've appeared there, why they're looking for a king in Jerusalem. It's because we've seen his star. Now, in their study of the stars, they had drawn the conclusion that there was a king that was born, a star that indicated a king that was born, King of the Jews. And they'd come to the capital, which is where you would expect to find King of the Jews. Now, the understanding of astronomers of that day was that kings and notable figures would sometimes have their birth announced by the appearance of a star. And I would take it maybe some star that they had not discovered before. And I don't know how they drew their conclusion. All we know is what they say, and that God had used this means of impressing upon their minds the birth of the Messiah. These people are Gentiles, non-Jewish people. And they come and they express this interest in the birth of the King of the Jews, when the Jews and the Jewish leaders, with the Messiah born right on their doorstep, you might say, are indifferent.
Do you think the commentaries give the indication that this star, that so much a big part of so many people's Christmas celebration was so obvious, or was it so subtle? Is anything ever? We'll never know, will we?
I don't know. There's another reference to it we'll look at in a minute.
It wasn't a part of any prophecy.
Well, Balaam had spoken of the star of Jacob, I believe it was, and I didn't put down that passage because I'm not sure there's any allusion to that, but it'd be in Numbers. Balaam's prophecy mentioned a star of Jacob, and there's some that connect it with that.
I don't know how much stock you can take in it, but in December, one year I went to the planetarium in Chicago, and they reenacted the star. It was a comet. And I mean, they historically have documented it, that it would have been at about that time. I mean, close enough. It was certainly the most likely thing that would have been.
Well, the commentaries mention that sort of thing, conjunction of planets and various things that astronomers can document. It says the star, not a fortuitous conjunction of planets and such things. So I don't know any more than we're told here.
I don't remember where I read this, but I remember that the astronomers had come up with a comet that came in about the time that you estimate that Jesus was born,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able to backtrack from the comet's future appearances, backtrack to it was very close to that time, and since that was such a rare occurrence, that was something that was just like maybe lifetimes go by and people don't see those.
Mm-hmm.
That was something so spectacular that would account for their astonishment.
Maybe so. I don't know.
But there's nothing else written about it. So.
The reaction of Herod. Herod is troubled. He was appointed king by the Romans, king of the Jews. But now here's one who is supposed to be of a legitimate king, born descended from David, king of the Jews, born king of the Jews, would be trouble for him. And so he's troubled by anyone who's going to be a competitor for his throne, and all Jerusalem with him. And maybe the explanation of that is that they were afraid of what Herod's reaction might be. When he became king, he killed all the kings of the Hasmonean line. Between the covenants, there were some people who became kings, John Hyrcanus and so forth, and he killed all of those who could claim to be king from that line of descent, and he killed various other nobles of Jerusalem that would be competitors to him. Finally, he kills his own beloved wife, Mary Ann, who was the descended from the Hasmonean line, and her two sons that were her sons by him. Kills them. One of the Caesars said he'd rather be Herod's swine than his son. I guess according to Jewish law, he would at least preserve he would not eat the swine, but or sacrifice them, but he would kill his sons. So one of the points that I want to make here is that a lot is made about the point a little bit later about the boy babies. Let me save that till I get there, and then I hope I remember this. The point I'm going to make is that this man shows the capability of doing something like that, killing of the boy babies 2 years and under. Even though we don't have any record of that from any other source, he has the capability of doing that and the character of it. So he wants to know where the child is going to be born, and here is where there's introduced, or the quotation of Micah chapter 5 and verse 2 about the birthplace. He goes to the experts on the law, the chief priests and the scribes, or the lawyers, the experts on the law, and he asks them where the Christ should be born. Not Jesus, but the Christ, the Messiah, where he should be born. And they draw upon Micah 5:2 to say that he would be born in Bethlehem. And then there was something else he wanted to know. Exactly when was this baby born? And so he calls in these wise men in verse 7 and learned of them exactly what time the star appeared. Now, this is why he will have those from 2 years and under killed. Now, this is not the Jesus is not in the stable anymore. They're in a house when the wise men find him. Some time has passed. At least a year, I would say. I wouldn't say that he was fully 2 years old. Herod would want to be sure that when he killed all these boy babies that he got the one that he wanted to kill. So
that's consistent with what you just described about the other murders he did. I mean, he wasn't having problems with those people. He's just making sure he wasn't going to.
Yeah, exactly. And so he sends them on to Bethlehem, and they complete their journey and found the Messiah. In verses 9 and 10, there's another reference to the star, which I don't really know how to explain. And they, having heard the king, went their way, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. So I take it that they had not been seeing the star the whole time, but it reappears. And there are some who take this very literally. The star went before them, stood over where the young child was. I mean, if this is a star in any literal sense, how can you tell what house it's over? So people are, when they take it in a very literal sense, they have to explain that this is not just an ordinary star. This is supernatural. It's a miraculous thing. And have to explain it in that way, and that it identifies precisely the house. I really doubt that view. I think what may be involved here is simply that they see the reappearance of this star that they had seen, an ordinary star, but one from which they were able to draw some conclusions about what had happened, and this reassures them that they're on the right track as they go to Bethlehem, and they would make their inquiries just like they did when they got to Jerusalem and find the precise house where a boy baby had been born. And I suspect that rather than the other more literal view is correct. But I won't argue very much. It's difficult to be exact in the explanation of this. All right, they come, they bring these gifts that are befitting a king. Now let me emphasize this again. I don't think I ever made my point about this, about these people being Gentiles and having this interest in the King of the Jews and coming and paying honor. They had this when the Jews would reject him. This becomes from the very beginning a kind of a foreshadowing of what was going to happen, where the ones who would accept the Messiah and bow to his rule would be primarily Gentiles, and that the Jews by and large would reject their Messiah, not only when Jesus appeared in his personal ministry, but also in the preaching of the apostles. They would. All right, now we have to quickly give a minute to each of these things. One of the things that is emphasized is the divine providence taking care of this child. No matter how Herod may plot, no matter how Satan may involve himself in trying to destroy this child, the hand of God is overshadowing this child, taking care of him. The wise men will be sent back another way. When they leave after their visit, verse 13 says, "Now when they were departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I tell thee, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him." And so one of the things I think that can be emphasized in chapter 2 is this overshadowing providence of God taking care of this child. He is secure against whatever the plottings and the evil purposes of Herod and others may be. So, in verses 14 and 15 it is pointed out that Joseph was obedient just as he had been and took him into Egypt, and would fulfill the prophecy of Hosea 11:1, which says, "Out of Egypt have I called my son." Let me be very plain about this. This is not a direct messianic prophecy. When you study this in Hosea 11:1, you see that this is just a historical statement about God's son Israel being brought out of Egypt. And I think what this is pointing out is the history of Israel being repeated in the Messiah. Not every prophecy is fulfilled in the same way, but as God brought Israel out of Egypt to establish a nation, so he would bring his Messiah out of Egypt to establish the new Israel. Then there's the slaughter of the boy babies in 16 to 18. And again, we've got a prophecy that of Jeremiah 31:15 about Rachel weeping for her children. Really, it's Rachel weeping again. When you study the context of this passage in Jeremiah, you find a passage in which it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, the carrying away of the people into captivity. And Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel weeps again. All kinds of ways where this figure, Jesus, the Christ, connected with Old Testament history. And it's all happening over again. And he is linked to the history of the nation in this way. And then the last thing, when Herod died, then Joseph again has a dream telling him to return to the land because those that sought the life of this child are dead. And he gets there and he finds out that Archelaus has inherited the kingdom, and he is just as bad as Herod the Great. So he's fearful, and so he's told to go into Nazareth. And verse 23 says, they came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken through the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene. A couple of things about the fulfillment of this. By settling in Nazareth, they were resettling. Luke points out in Luke chapter 1:26, Luke chapter 2 verse 4, that this was the former home of both Joseph and Mary. So they were resettling in the place of their nativity, I guess.
Had they gone
in Nazareth.
Was it the census or whatever that took them?
Took them to Bethlehem.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess they thought that when they came back that the logical place would be around Jerusalem, but it's not to be so. And his main work is going to be in the north. Now the other thing, the fulfillment of this prophecy, you'll find no prophecy in the Old Testament that says he should be called a Nazarene in those words. I think the way this is to be explained is this. Nazareth was a contemptible place. When Philip, I think it was, came to Nathanael and said, we found the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, in John 1:46, Nathanael says what? Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Contemptible. They're on the fringe of the Gentile territory and way off up there, away from Jerusalem. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? That is exactly what the prophets had predicted about the Messiah in Isaiah 53:3 especially, but also in other places like Psalm 22. But in Isaiah 53, he would be despised, rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with griefs. We esteemed him not, placed no value on him. So I think that's the way this is fulfilled. By being called a Nazarene, by a place that was held in such contempt as Nazareth was, that very idea would fulfill the idea of these Old Testament prophecies, which would speak of the contempt with which this suffering servant would be regarded. Any quick shot? We'll have to close here.